How important, rather, is this conference in terms of the ideas likely to be borrowed?
So thank you. The conference brings together different stakeholders that are involved in the field of food security. And just to mention a few, universities are very key in this issue.
Right.
For instance, Kenya largely depends on land for a lot of our resources. And when we think about food security, we are talking largely about land. So the accessibility of land to people or to farmers to be able to plant crops and be able to harvest from that. But then you cannot speak about food security from just a land management perspective.
Right.
You also have to think about the water. And we largely depend, our agriculture largely depends on water for growing our crops. So it is, those two then are very key to food security. And this conference then brings people that are coming from the different disciplines to come and in one location and speak about ideas on how we can improve the way we manage our land, the way we manage our water resources, with an outcome of improving the way improving the productivity of our land in terms of giving us enough food, but also sufficient and quality, safe food.
Absolutely. And let's speak about that, in more detail, Anastasia, because food security, again, isn't just about the quantity of the food we're producing. The quality and the safety of the food is also a big component, and that has been quite a debate in the country now. We're hearing reports of perhaps, meat that we're consuming from some parts of the country being contaminated, water being disseminated into all parts of the country, perhaps being contaminated. How does the Regional Center for Mapping for Resources for Development come in here in terms really of working with other stakeholders to ensure safety of our resources?
Well, I think number one, we use Earth observation data, that is satellite images mostly, to monitor what's happening on land, on crops, on water as well. So in terms of safety, we usually monitor like the crops, the health of the crops, and we believe that the contribution that we give in terms of safety is the continuous monitoring of crops as they grow, and that we do together with the Ministry of Agriculture, and they are able to issue alerts. For example, if the health of the crops is seen from satellite images is not really going to affect the harvest. But in terms of the other thing that we are able to look at, for example, is the health of the soil. Because, for example, the elements that are there in the soil, there are satellite images that are able to monitor, for example, the carbon that's available in the soil. And mainly this just to ensure that the crops grow in a healthy way. But in terms of chemicals, I think that one is an advancing science that will probably come in later in terms of how healthy are the outputs or the harvests that you are able to get.
Right.
So we are able to monitor the health of the crops as seen from a satellite image, but in terms of the elements or the components.
Perhaps the impact of these crops
yes,
on
health, that one we are not able to from the kind of science that we do. Yes.
But of course, there are bodies that are mandated to do that.
Yeah.
But Dennis, your thoughts on this issue, especially when you talk about the quality and the safety of our resources for development. I mean, we are a largely agricultural country, and if most of the food that we are producing is contaminated in one way or the other, then it compromises food security at the end of the day.
Right.
Talk to us about some of the technology, perhaps, that we're likely to see in this conference that can be used to mitigate these issues.
Sure. Let me take you back to the Sustainable Development Goals. And the impressive thing about SDGs is that it has put science, technology, and innovation at the center of achieving the SDGs.
Right.
And what this conference gives us is an opportunity to be able to showcase what technologies that we have. And I'm going to mention a few of these technologies, for instance. So what Anastasia is talking about Earth observations. So you have a satellite that is observing a large area of say, an area like a county, for instance. And because these satellites are able to overpass these areas, say, twice every day, then you have a series of images. And images, in this case, you can think about them as a picture that tells us what is happening. Now, a satellite image on itself can show you a picture of what is happening or what is on the ground, but then you require something else to be able to actually decipher information from that satellite imagery. And that's where now the innovation part comes in. We need computers, and we need computer programs that are able to synthesize what this image tells us. And in terms of looking at the security of water resources, and then of course that has an implication on the security of our foods, of our crops, and the food that we get from that. Then the innovations that we are expecting to see in this conference are those coming from people working on land management, for instance. How do you allocate people parcels of land? And other kind of technologies would be, what are the computer programs that are available to help people be able to know, what this parcel of land belongs to who, and this parcel of land has this proportion, say for instance, crop area or this proportion of buildings. And that way then we are able to use these technologies then to be able to quantify, for instance, how much can we harvest from a certain food production area, like Uasin Gishu in our case here. And other technologies that we also expect to see in these conferences are tools that we can use to disseminate information to decision makers. So if the farmer, for instance, has a big part to play in this food security and nexus, in that they are the people that are the primary producers, right? But then we have a decision maker somewhere sitting in a ministry or in the government as an overall organ that require information that is not necessarily in the form of how many acres we have, but how much the quantity of food that we are expecting, so that now they can make this information convert it into a decision. So do we need to bring in more food? Do we need to move food from farmers to the markets? And these are the kind of innovations and technologies that we are expecting to showcase in this conference. And the conversation with the researchers and the universities and the policymakers provides us that opportunity then to bring the technical people and the policymakers
together.
Talk together.
And it's interesting you say that, because very recently we saw the maize scandal play out, and the government on one part saying we might need to import more, but farmers saying, wait, we have so much that is still stored in our stores that is yet to be used. So that will be a great connection to see. But Anastasia, perhaps we've seen a lot of dispute and conflict in Kenya. In fact, you cannot talk about land without terming it an emotive issue in the country. What are some of the challenges that have been experienced in terms of conserving and perhaps allocating land and water resources in Kenya?
Well, I think in terms of land, and I do agree about the conflicts, we do have tools, and we are still adapting and trying to see what we can do. But one of the things we do, for example, is to monitor the rangelands. We know most of the conflicts actually come from the livestock areas, the Kenyan rangelands, especially towards the north and in the Rift Valley. And that's because there's that competition for the rangelands between the livestock keepers, the wildlife conservancies, and they all want to get benefits from this land. Right. So for us, by using these satellite images to monitor the health and the amount of forage that's available within the rangelands, then we are able to give that information to the stakeholders. For example, we have one project where we're working with the Northern Rangelands Trust and the Laikipia County, and we are able to monitor how are the grasslands within those areas at any one time, using data that's derived from satellite images. And from that, using maps that we also have, like the administrative boundaries, for example. So if you're within Laikipia and there are conservancies there, and they are grazing, the people who own the livestock, they have their own way of moving the livestock around. They have like grazing blocks, which we have assisted them to digitize, so that if those maps are overlaid within the map of the forage, the greenness that we produce from satellite images, then you can know this area is dry, this area has got enough grass for our animals. And with the conversations between the livestock keepers and the conservancy people, they're able to agree on this is where we go move our animals, this is where we cannot. And we're also able to monitor the water, the service water that is available within those areas, the water pans, the dams, and at any one point you can know there's a water pan here, so most probably the livestock keepers will take their livestock there. So how do we ensure that we manage this in vis-a-vis the conservancy so that there are no conflicts?
Right.
And this is one of the, I think one of the great things that we've been able to do. And the Laikipia County has been very supportive, and other counties within the north, Garissa, Isiolo, Marsabit, invasive species. The acacia and the prosopis that just spread, and they are always green. So sometimes when you look at our satellite images, you see the green, but it's not palatable, you know, forage for the animals. So how we are also able to use that and be able to inform them that whatever you can see as green here, because we have mapped some of the occurrences of the species, is not actually forage. So you should not like take your animals there, and they also to use that information to be able to mitigate the spread of those species so that they get more for the livestock and for the wildlife as well.
Right, and we'll be talking more about where the conference will be and who can come. But Dennis, at the end of the day, what I get from this is just, you know, it's a great opportunity to bridge the gaps that exist. So if there is, you know, drought in one area and there's excess water in the other area, then this gap can then be bridged. But there have been complaints that we have such great institutions doing such great different things, but the convergence of these recommendations, the convergence of the findings of your research then do not come together to impact Kenyans as is. Talk to us about the interagency approach to ensure that when legislators are making the decisions, they factor in your approaches, they factor in approaches of KEBS, for example, and any other agency involved here.
Yeah, so coordination has always been a challenge, and coordination from where we see it in terms of collaboration between agencies, right? And you will agree with me that you cannot achieve much, you know, if you're doing your research in a silo somewhere and you only think that you're the best person that can provide the best type of information. So collaboration then becomes very key. The regional center itself, even the way it is structured, you know, it is working with different governments in the Eastern and Southern African regions, and as Tasha talked about. And what this mandates us, or if you like, forces us, is to collaborate with different institutions in these governments to achieve a research agenda, right? And here in Kenya, for instance, if you look at the area of food security, we have the Ministry of Agriculture, which is the government organ that basically should, you know, drives the agricultural agenda. And there are many partners that are involved in food security. But the ministry, what it does is that, you know, it tries to coordinate all of these stakeholders together in working groups, for instance, one that is called the National Food Security Working Group. And these are a bunch of institutions that are working on research and development in the area of agriculture. And the working groups basically give that, or provide that platform for multi-stakeholder engagement and conversations around an issue. For instance, let's talk about recently the army worms.
Right,
you know,
right.
It is because of interagency coordination and collaboration that you know, governments are now being able to leverage this information coming from this type of coordination, and then being able to address such an issue. So,
Right.
so it will continue to be a challenge, but then there are all conversations like this conference that is giving people that opportunity to come together and think about an
And
issue
discuss
and
more,
address
absolutely.
it and discuss.
Let me just stop you there for a moment, Dennis, and take our viewers live to Mombasa, where several people were injured last night when a gang struck Bamburi area and attacked people indiscriminately. Authorities are now giving an update on the situation there. Let's cross over and listen in.
Kwa sababu pia wanaleta hatari kwa watu yetu.